Have you ever watched someone hide in plain sight? Not behind a wall or a closed door, but inside their own clothes, layering on fabric like armor, shrinking themselves down until the world simply stops noticing them. That was her every single morning. Baggy gray sweaters, oversized slacks, cheap fleece pulled over her body like a fortress wall. She buried herself completely, praying she could just stay invisible in the brutal corporate world she worked in. And for a while, it worked. It fooled her cruel co-workers. It fooled her backstabbing ex. But there was one man she badly underestimated. Because while everyone else looked at her and saw a frumpy, overweight bookkeeper to laugh at, the most dangerous crime boss in the entire region looked at her and saw something else entirely. A brilliant queen, hidden under all that wool, just waiting to be discovered. Stick around, because this is a story about what happens when the wrong person finally sees you for who you really are. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the sleek, glass-paneled offices high up in a downtown skyscraper, casting a cold, sterile glare across the floor. Katrina sat hunched over her dual monitors, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She was swallowed up in a men's enormous navy blue cardigan that hung past her knees, paired with shapeless black slacks that dragged slightly on the carpet. And beneath all those heavy, suffocating layers of wool and cotton, she hid a body that the world and her own painful history had taught her to hate. She was a big woman, soft, full curves, thick thighs, a generous figure she worked hard to flatten and disguise every single day. To the impossibly thin administrative assistants and the gym-obsessed finance guys who roamed the office, Katrina was a running joke. They had a cruel nickname for her that they whispered behind her back, something about the size of her sweaters. And no one was crueler than Liam. Liam was the senior financial director, a title he held entirely on the back of Katrina's grueling, completely uncredited labor. He was also her ex-boyfriend. 3 years earlier, when Katrina was a naive junior accountant, Liam had charmed his way into a quiet, secret relationship with her. She had cooked for him, cleaned his apartment, built his corporate portfolios from scratch. And then, the night before a major promotion, she found him in his car with a thin blonde receptionist. When Katrina confronted him, her heart shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces, Liam had looked her up and down with pure disgust. "Come on, Katrina," he had sneered, the words burning themselves permanently into her mind. "Look at you. Did you honestly think a guy like me would walk down the street holding hands with someone who looks like you? Be realistic. You're good for doing my spreadsheets. That's it." Since that day, Katrina had retreated completely into her shell. She stopped trying to find clothes that flattered her. She stopped wearing makeup. She became a ghost, silently doing Liam's work because he constantly threatened to have her fired if she didn't comply. He had the ear of upper management. And she was just the invisible woman in the corner. But upper management was about to get a terrifying shakeup. For weeks, rumors had been swirling that the actual owner of the company was coming to town to audit the branch himself. And the company itself was an open secret in certain circles. On paper, it was a perfectly legal, highly profitable logistics firm. In reality, it was a front for a powerful crime syndicate, a family that controlled the shipping ports across half the country. At exactly 10 o'clock on a rainy Tuesday morning, the temperature in the office seemed to drop 20 degrees. The heavy double doors of the executive suite swung open, and the man himself walked in. His name was Dwayne, and he sucked all the oxygen out of any room he entered. Tall, dressed in a custom black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and narrow waist, he looked like a predator forced uncomfortably into civilized clothing. His hair was dark and swept back, his jaw rough with stubble, and his eyes were a pale, piercing amber that missed absolutely nothing. 4 massive men trailed behind him, each with a telltale bulge under his jacket. "Boardroom," Dwayne rumbled, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that sent a shiver down Katrina's spine. "All senior staff, now." Katrina kept her head down, desperately trying to melt into her cubicle walls. She wasn't senior staff, she was just the invisible drone. But Liam paused by her desk on his way past, slamming a thick file onto her keyboard. "I need the quarterly projections for the warehouse division," he hissed venomously, adjusting his silk tie. "And fix the discrepancies in the offshore routing. If he asks questions, I need the answers fed to my tablet immediately. Do not screw this up." Katrina swallowed the thick lump of humiliation in her throat, her cheeks burning. "I fixed the offshore routing last night, Liam. The numbers you entered were triggering a federal red flag. I buried the surplus in the shell accounts, just like you asked." "Whatever. Just make sure the dashboard is live," Liam snapped, marching off toward the glass boardroom. For the next 2 hours, Katrina sat at her desk, watching the boardroom through the glass walls. Dwayne sat at the head of the long table, radiating a lethal, terrifying stillness. Liam stood at the projector, confidently presenting Katrina's intricate financial models, taking credit for her genius, smiling that smarmy, practiced smile of his. Suddenly, Dwayne raised a single ringed hand. The room fell dead silent. Even through the thick glass, Katrina could see the panic flash across Liam's face. Dwayne leaned forward and pointed a long, tattooed finger at the projection. He was asking a question. Liam stammered. He tapped his tablet wildly, waiting for Katrina to throw him a lifeline. Quickly, she typed out the explanation of the tax loophole into their secure chat. But Liam was so flustered he misread it completely, blurting out an answer so wrong that the other executives visibly winced. Dwayne didn't yell. He didn't even blink. He simply turned his head, his pale amber eyes slowly scanning the open office floor outside the boardroom. He was looking for the real brain behind the operation. He knew a hollow suit like Liam could never have designed a money laundering system that sophisticated. And then, through the glass, his eyes locked directly onto Katrina. She froze. Her breath caught in her chest. She tugged frantically at the collar of her oversized sweater, trying to shrink further into her chair. She was used to people looking right through her. But Dwayne wasn't looking through her. He was looking at her. His gaze dropped from her panicked face to the massive, shapeless bulk of her clothing, and a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the corner of his ruthless mouth. He knew. By 9 o'clock that night, the office was deserted. The storm outside had escalated, violent sheets of rain lashing against the windows. The building's air conditioning had been shut off for the night, leaving the sprawling floor stiflingly warm. Katrina was the only one left. Liam had ordered her to stay behind and recalibrate the entire quarterly portfolio because Dwayne had demanded a full forensic review by morning. She was exhausted. Her lower back ached, and sweat was beginning to bead on her forehead. The heavy fleece cardigan was becoming an unbearable oven. Believing she was completely alone, Katrina finally gave in to the oppressive heat. She stood up, checked the dark, empty corridors, and slowly unbuttoned the massive cardigan, shrugging it off her shoulders and draping it over her chair. Underneath, she wore a simple, white button-down shirt. Without the heavy armor of the sweater, the shape of her body could no longer be hidden. She sighed, raising her arms to gather her frizzy brown hair into a messy bun. "The system you built for the offshore accounts is flawless," a dark velvet voice echoed from the shadows. "But the idiot presenting it doesn't know the difference between a hedge fund and a parking ticket." Katrina screamed, spinning violently around and colliding with the edge of her desk, her hands flying up instinctively to cover herself. Dwayne stepped out of the darkness of the hallway. He had discarded his suit jacket, wearing only a black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, exposing forearms corded with dense muscle and covered in intricate dark ink. He moved with the silent, terrifying grace of a predator. His eyes locked onto her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Mr. Russo!" Katrina gasped, her voice trembling. She frantically reached for her giant cardigan, desperate to cover herself. I'm sorry. I thought everyone had gone home. I'm just finishing up Mr. Bradley's reports." Dwayne stepped closer, his large hand snapping out to snatch the cardigan before she could reach it. He tossed the heavy fleece onto a nearby filing cabinet, well out of her reach. "Leave it," he commanded softly, his voice leaving absolutely no room for debate. "It's 90 degrees in here. You're sweating." Katrina's heart hammered against her ribs. She crossed her arms over her stomach, shrinking under his scrutiny. "Please," she whispered, tears of embarrassment pricking her eyes. "I know how I look. You don't have to look at me. I'll just get my work done and leave." Dwayne stopped just inches away. The scent of him, rich cedar and expensive tobacco and pure, concentrated danger, enveloped her senses. He didn't look at her with the disgust Liam always had. He didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her the way a starving man looks at a feast. "And how do you look, Katrina?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave as his eyes slowly traced the curves she'd spent years hiding. "I know how I look," she choked out, her gaze glued to the carpet. "My ex-boyfriend Liam, he reminds me every day. That's why I hide. So please just let me put my sweater back on." A terrifying, murderous darkness flashed in Dwayne's amber eyes at the mention of Liam's name. His jaw clenched so hard a muscle ticked visibly in his cheek. Slowly, he reached out. Katrina flinched, bracing for a blow or a cruel shove. But instead, she felt the calloused, incredibly warm tips of his fingers gently tilt her chin upward, forcing her to look into his eyes. "Liam Bradley is a dead man walking," Dwayne said, his tone conversational but dripping with lethal intent. "He's a thief, a liar, and a fundamentally stupid man. But his greatest sin is his blindness." His hand moved from her chin, his large palm coming to rest against her stomach. Katrina gasped at the intimate contact. No one had touched her there without recoiling in years. "You are not hiding anymore, Katrina," he murmured, stepping so close his chest nearly brushed against her. "Do you have any idea what it does to a man like me, to see a woman wrapping herself in garbage just to protect the fragile ego of a weak boy?" Katrina was paralyzed. Her mind was short-circuiting. The head of a criminal empire was standing in her cubicle, calling her beautiful. It had to be a cruel joke, a trick. "The offshore accounts," she deflected desperately, trying to step back, but her hips hit the desk. "Liam didn't route the money. I did. I saw the unlisted shell companies. I know what this company is doing, Mr. Russo. I know what's being washed through here. If you're here to kill me because I know too much, just do it. But don't mock me." Dwayne didn't pull a gun. Instead, a dark, genuine chuckle rumbled deep in his chest. He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. "Kill my brilliant little bookkeeper," he whispered. "Not a chance, sweetheart. I don't destroy assets. I claim them. And starting tomorrow, you don't work for the company. You work for me. Personally." The next morning, the sun cast long, dramatic shadows across the polished marble of the executive boardroom. At 9 o'clock sharp, Liam strode in, a smug grin plastered across his handsome face, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. He was certain Katrina's late-night labor was about to secure him a massive bonus and a seat on the regional board. Dwayne was already seated at the head of the table, flanked by two massive enforcers whose faces showed no emotion at all. And to Liam's immediate annoyance, Katrina was in the room too. But she wasn't cowering in the corner in her usual grey tent. On Dwayne's strict orders the night before, she had gone home and dug into the very back of her closet. She was wearing a deep burgundy wrap dress, a piece she'd bought years ago and never dared put on. The soft fabric clung to her curves, and she was visibly trembling, clutching a folder to her chest, her face flushed as the executive stared. "What is she doing in here?" Liam hissed, stopping dead in his tracks and sneering at her dress. "Are we hosting a bake sale, Evans? Go back to your desk before you break a chair." The silence in the room became instantly, violently heavy. Dwayne didn't raise his voice. He didn't even stand. He simply steepled his fingers on the table and stared at Liam with the cold, unblinking gaze of a shark. "Sit down, Bradley," Liam gulped, his smug smile faltering. He took a seat near the middle of the table and opened his portfolio. "Mr. Russo, I have the revised projections you requested. I stayed up all night finalizing the offshore." "You didn't write a single line of that code," Dwayne interrupted, his voice cutting through the air like a razor. "You didn't balance those ledgers. You didn't build the shell companies. You spent last night at a cocktail bar with an intern, paying for it with a stolen company credit card. Liam's face drained of all color. "Aye, sir, I don't know who told you that, but—" Dwayne gestured to Katrina. "Ms. Evans, walk us through the offshore routing." Katrina took a shaky breath. She looked at Liam's panicked face, the man who had abused her, humiliated her, and shattered her self-esteem for years. Then she looked at Dwayne, who gave her a slow, encouraging nod. Empowered by the terrifying man backing her, she stepped forward and laid her folder on the table. "The original ledger created by Mr. Bradley was fundamentally flawed," she said, her voice steadying. "He attempted to siphon a percentage of the unlisted cash flow into a private dummy account registered under his mother's maiden name, embezzlement. He tried to hide it within the legitimate overhead, but the math created a recursive error. I found it. I isolated the stolen funds, rerouted them back into the primary holdings, and locked the dummy account." The executives gasped. Liam leapt to his feet, his chair crashing to the floor behind him. "You set me up!" he screamed, lunging toward her. "You!" He never made it within 5 feet. With blinding speed, one of Dwayne's enforcers stepped forward, grabbed Liam by the throat and belt, lifted him clean off the floor, and slammed him face first into the heavy table. The sickening crack of his nose breaking echoed through the room, and blood splattered across the polished wood. Katrina flinched and stepped back, but Dwayne was suddenly right behind her, his large, hot hand resting firmly on the small of her back, a physical anchor in the chaos. "Embezzlement from a logistics firm gets you fired and arrested, Bradley," Dwayne said, walking slowly toward the bleeding man pinned to the table. "But you didn't steal from a logistics firm. You stole from my family, and worse." He reached down, grabbing a fistful of Liam's hair, yanking his bloody face up so he was forced to look at Katrina. "You disrespected the woman who just saved my entire empire from a federal audit." "Please, Mr. Russo, I'll pay it back," Liam sobbed hysterically. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." "Take him to the warehouse by the docks," Dwayne ordered his men, his voice utterly devoid of mercy. "Let the boys explain our severance package to him." Liam screamed and thrashed as he was dragged out by his collar, his shoes scraping against the marble, leaving a trail of blood and shattered pride in his wake. The heavy doors clicked shut, plunging the room back into terrifying silence. Dwayne turned, pulling a crisp handkerchief from his pocket and wiping a single drop of blood from his cuff. He looked at the frozen, terrified executives. "Katrina Evans is now the chief financial officer of this organization," he announced, walking back to her and wrapping a heavy arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his side. "She reports solely to me. Anyone who speaks to her without absolute respect will find themselves joining Mr. Bradley at the docks." Meeting adjourned. As the executives scrambled out, Katrina stood trembling against his side, the adrenaline crashing as the reality of her new life sank in. She wasn't an invisible bookkeeper anymore. She was the right hand to one of the most dangerous men in the country. Dwayne looked down at her, his thumb gently tracing the curve of her hip through the burgundy fabric. "You did perfectly, my queen," he murmured. "Now we're leaving. I'm taking you shopping. You will never hide this spectacular body in a cheap sweater again." Sunlight poured through the massive skylights of an exclusive boutique, reflecting off polished brass and pristine white marble. Katrina stood awkwardly in the center of the showroom, feeling entirely out of place. For years, she'd bought her shapeless garments from discount stores, deliberately avoiding high-end places where sample sizes ruled and women who looked like her were quietly pushed out the door. A tall, painfully thin saleswoman with a sleek blonde bob and a sharp, judgmental gaze approached. She looked at Katrina, then at the rumpled dress, and a barely concealed sneer touched her painted lips. "May I help you?" she asked, her tone dripping with polite condescension. "If you're looking for the plus-size section, we don't carry those lines in this particular location. You might want to try the department store 3 blocks down." Katrina instinctively shrank back, her old habits flaring up. She reached out and brushed the sleeve of Dwayne's jacket. "Dwayne, she's right. Let's just go. I don't belong in a place like this." Dwayne did not move. He stood like a monolith of dark, furious energy, his amber eyes locking onto the saleswoman with terrifying intensity. He slowly unbuttoned his jacket, revealing the holster strapped to his ribs. The woman's arrogant expression shattered instantly, replaced by wide-eyed terror. "You will lock the front doors," Dwayne commanded, his voice a low, lethal purr that echoed off the marble. "You will cancel every appointment you have for the rest of the day. You will bring out every gown, blouse, and coat in this building that will fit this spectacular woman. If you don't have her size, you'll call your competitors and have it couriered here within the hour. And if you ever speak to my chief financial officer with that tone again, I will buy this building just to bulldoze it with you inside." The saleswoman swallowed hard, her manicured hands trembling. "Right away, sir. I apologize. I completely misunderstood." Within 10 minutes, the entire boutique had shifted into a frantic, terrified frenzy. Managers and seamstresses buzzed around Katrina like worker bees. Racks of custom silk and rich velvet were wheeled out from the back rooms. For the first time in her life, Katrina wasn't being forced into something designed to hide her. Under Dwayne's watchful gaze, she was being draped in clothes built to worship her. She stepped out of the dressing room wearing an emerald green silk dress that hugged her curves and cinched at the waist, giving her a devastating silhouette. She looked in the floor-to-ceiling mirror and gasped. The woman staring back wasn't a frumpy, invisible ghost. She was a powerful, striking figure. Dwayne stood up from the sofa, his eyes dark with admiration. He walked up behind her, his hands resting on her hips, and met her gaze in the mirror. "No more hiding," he whispered. "You have a mind that terrifies men, and a presence that commands every room. It's time you stepped into the light." But the light cast long, dangerous shadows. 3 hours later, Katrina sat in the back of Dwayne's armored car, surrounded by shopping bags as they drove toward his estate. But as they pulled up to the heavily guarded gates of the compound, the brutal reality of his world came crashing down. Waiting on the front steps of the massive mansion was a man Katrina had never seen, older, with silver hair and a sharp nose, flanked by 6 heavily armed men. Dwayne's jaw clenched instantly, the warmth radiating from him vanishing, replaced by cold, calculating violence. "Stay in the car, Katrina," he ordered, slipping his hand inside his jacket. "Lock the doors." "Who is that?" she asked, her heart hammering. "Arthur Moretti," Dwayne sneered. "Head of a rival syndicate, a cockroach who thinks he can feast on my crumbs. Don't move." Katrina watched through the tinted bulletproof glass as Dwayne stepped out. His enforcers materialized from the shadows, forming a lethal wall around their boss. Arthur smiled a cold, reptilian smile. "Dwayne, I heard you had an exciting morning. I was surprised to learn that Liam Bradley, our mutual friend, who was supplying me with a very lucrative stream of offshore data, suddenly had a tragic accident at the docks." Katrina gasped inside the car. Liam hadn't just been embezzling for himself. He'd been selling family secrets to a rival. "Bradley was a thief and a traitor," Dwayne replied calmly. "His accident was self-inflicted, and the pipeline he was feeding you is permanently severed. The accounts are locked." Arthur's eyes drifted past Dwayne toward the dark glass of the car. "A pipeline is only as secure as the plumber who fixes it. I hear you have a new CFO. Some little desk jockey you elevated from the basement. Do you honestly think a glorified secretary can outsmart my accountants? Hand over the new encryption keys, or we go to war." Dwayne didn't flinch. He stepped closer, towering over the older man. "You don't have the capital for a war, Arthur. And if you ever speak of my CFO with disrespect again, I'll feed you to my hounds. Get off my property." Arthur glared, his face flushing with fury, then signaled his men to back toward their vehicles. "You're getting soft, Russo. Trusting your empire to a nobody will be your downfall. We'll see who owns the ports on Friday." As the rival vehicles peeled away, Dwayne returned and opened the car door. Katrina was shaking, her mind racing. "He's going to attack the company," she whispered. "Let him try," Dwayne said, pulling her close. "I have an army. He can't touch us." But Katrina's brilliant, mathematically gifted mind was already clicking into high gear. She remembered the routing numbers Liam had used. She remembered the dummy corporations Arthur was likely hiding behind. "You don't need an army, Dwayne. she said, her voice steadying as a newfound ruthless confidence bloomed in her chest. She smoothed down her emerald dress. You just need your CFO. Give me access to the master servers. I'm going to bankrupt Arthur Moretti by Thursday. Thursday night arrived. The underground ballroom of a grand hotel was a cavern of velvet, cigar smoke, and dangerous secrets, the traditional venue for a monthly summit where the major syndicates of the region met to negotiate, threaten, and display their power. Katrina stood beside Dwayne at the head of a massive table. She wasn't trembling anymore. Draped in a stunning custom black velvet gown, her hair expertly styled into voluminous curls, a bold red lipstick on her full lips. She looked every inch a queen. She stood tall, refusing to shrink, letting her presence demand the space it deserved in a room full of lethal men. Dwayne kept a possessive hand on her lower back, a silent warning to every man who dared stare too long. Across the table sat Arthur Moretti, smug, flanked by his top men and a sleazy, rail-thin accountant furiously typing on a laptop. He believed he was walking into a victory lap. "I'm glad you brought your little pet, Dwayne," Arthur sneered, lighting a cigar and looking Katrina up and down with blatant disgust. "Though I'm surprised you found a dress big enough." A few of his men chuckled. The sound cut off instantly as Dwayne's hand slid toward the gun at his waist. The room plunged into suffocating silence. But Katrina gently placed her hand over Dwayne's rigid forearm, stopping him. She didn't need physical violence to destroy a man. She was a weapon of an entirely different kind. "Mr. Moretti," she said, her voice clear and carrying absolute authority. "I'd worry less about my dress size and a great deal more about your plummeting net worth, though I suppose an empty wallet is much lighter to carry." Arthur scoffed, blowing smoke at the ceiling. "Cute, sweetheart. But my accountants have already bypassed Bradley's old firewalls. We have a freeze on your shipping manifests. By midnight, your routes default to my holding companies." Katrina smiled a cold, terrifying smile that perfectly mirrored Dwayne's. She picked up a sleek tablet and slid it gracefully across the table until it bumped Arthur's ashtray. "You should really check your work, Arthur," she said, her tone dripping with the exact condescension she'd suffered for years. When Liam set up the embezzlement pipeline, he used an unstable crypto tumbler to hide the trail. When you tried to brute force your way in on Tuesday, you tripped a recursive trap I built into the ledger. Arthur's accountant suddenly went pale, his fingers freezing on the keys. "What is she talking about?" Arthur barked. "Sir," the accountant stammered, sweat pouring down his face. "The offshore accounts. They're empty. Our primary holdings, the real estate trusts, the pension funds, they're zeroed out." Arthur lunged forward, grabbing the tablet. The screen showed a live feed of his entire criminal empire's finances. Every account drained. "You didn't just freeze my shipping lines," Katrina explained softly, leaning forward and letting the sheer presence of her intellect crush the room. "You accidentally opened a back door into your own servers. I didn't just lock you out of our company. I siphoned every dollar of your illegal revenue, washed it, and buried it permanently in untraceable trusts under fake names. You are completely bankrupt." "You lying!" Arthur roared, hurling the tablet against the wall where it shattered. He reached for his weapon, losing his mind entirely. Before his hand even touched the holster, Dwayne moved. He vaulted over the corner of the table with the speed of a striking viper, grabbed Arthur by the lapels, and slammed him into the stone wall. Arthur's men reached for their weapons, but the room instantly filled with the sound of 20 guns cocking. Dwayne's enforcers had every one of them dead to rights. "You lost the war before you even fired a shot, Arthur," Dwayne growled, his face inches from the bankrupt man's. "My CFO just stripped you of your power, your money, and your dignity. You're nothing now. If I see your face in this city again, I'll let her strip you of your life. Get out!" He threw Arthur to the ground. The formerly powerful boss scrambled up, coughing and humiliated, staring at Katrina with sheer terror. He finally understood what Dwayne had seen all along. The soft woman in the velvet dress was the most dangerous predator in the room. Arthur and his men fled. The remaining bosses at the table stared at Katrina in absolute silent awe. No one cared about her weight. No one saw a victim. They saw a genius who had just toppled an empire with a keystroke. Dwayne walked back to her, the violent rage bleeding out of him, replaced by overwhelming pride. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her against his chest in front of the entire underworld. Brilliant, he murmured against her lips, kissing her deeply, marking her as his equal, his partner, and his undisputed queen. Absolutely brilliant. Months later, snow began to fall softly over the city as a grand winter gala filled a legendary hotel ballroom with the clink of crystal and the murmur of the ultra-wealthy. For the first time in her life, Katrina wasn't sitting at home crying over cruel text messages. Tonight, she was the undisputed center of gravity in the most exclusive room in the region. She stood near a towering ice sculpture, a vision of unapologetic power in a custom deep sapphire gown designed explicitly for her by a private atelier overseas. The syndicate had never been stronger. With Arthur bankrupted and driven out, and Liam serving a long sentence in fear for his life, Katrina had completely restructured the family's finances, funneling everything into impenetrable, entirely legitimate real estate developments. The authorities had spent months trying to trace the money she'd moved, but her work was a ghost. She had made Dwayne untouchable. She wasn't just his CFO anymore. She was the architect of his entire empire. But the night wasn't over. As Katrina stepped into a quiet marble corridor on her way to the powder room, a shadow detached itself from a nearby alcove. It was Liam. But he was barely recognizable. His suit was torn and stained, his nose bandaged and crooked, one eye swollen shut and blooming with bruises. He looked erratic, starving, unhinged. He'd somehow escaped before processing, and now he raised a trembling pistol, aiming it directly at her chest. "Surprised to see me?" he hissed, his voice raspy and broken. Katrina froze. But surprisingly, she didn't feel the paralyzing terror she used to feel when he berated her. Looking at him now, a pathetic, broken man hiding in a hallway, the illusion of his power over her completely shattered. "What are you doing here, Liam?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady. "You were exiled. You were supposed to leave." "Leave? With what money?" he spat, waving the gun frantically. "You drained Moretti. He thinks I gave you the codes, so he put a hit on me. The cops are after me for the embezzlement. My life is ruined because of you." Katrina stood tall. She didn't cross her arms over her stomach. She didn't try to shrink. She let the heavy sapphire velvet drape proudly over her figure and looked from the gun to his desperate, bruised face. "Your life is ruined because of your own greed, Liam," she said coldly. "You thought you could abuse me, steal from the most dangerous people in the city and sell their secrets, all without consequence. You thought my silence was weakness. It wasn't. It was survival. And I don't need to survive you anymore." "Shut up!" Liam cried, tears spilling from his good eye. "I'm going to kill you." "You'll do nothing." A voice colder than the winter outside echoed from the end of the hallway. Liam spun around with a pathetic squeak of terror. Dwayne stood at the entrance of the corridor, not even bothering to draw his weapon. He didn't need to. Behind him stood 4 of his enforcers, suppressed weapons already leveled at Liam's head. "Drop it, Bradley!" Dwayne ordered, his voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of a death sentence. "If that weapon discharges, even by accident, my men won't kill you. They'll keep you alive, somewhere very unpleasant, for a very, very long time." Liam's hand shook so violently the gun rattled. He looked at Katrina, then at Dwayne, and the crushing reality of his situation finally dawned. With a whimper, he dropped the gun. It clattered against the marble. He fell to his knees, weeping like a child. Dwayne strode forward, his eyes locked entirely on Katrina, and pulled her fiercely against him, burying his face in the crook of her neck. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice thick with an emotion that sounded terrifyingly close to fear. "I'm fine," Katrina whispered, holding him tightly. "He didn't touch me. He's just a coward." Dwayne pulled back, finding no lie in her eyes. and the fear morphed instantly into cold vengeance. He turned to his men. "Don't kill him," Katrina said suddenly, her voice ringing clear. Liam looked up, a pathetic spark of hope in his swollen eye. Dwayne frowned. "Katrina, he pulled a weapon on you. He dies tonight." "Death is too quick for what he did," Katrina stated, stepping out of his embrace and looking down at Liam with chilling authority. She understood the mathematics of true justice. "If he disappears, he becomes a mystery. I don't want him to be a mystery. I want him to be an example." She looked up at Dwayne. "I already compiled the full digital footprint of his embezzlement and his communication with Arthur. It violates federal racketeering law on 7 different levels. I sent the encrypted file to the FBI an hour before we arrived tonight." Dwayne's eyes widened, an awestruck grin spreading across his face. "The feds are probably at his apartment right now," Katrina continued calmly. "Hand him over through official channels. He'll go to general population, and every inmate in that place works for your family. Let them know he's an informant who stole from you." Liam screamed, scrambling backward across the marble. "No! Just shoot me! Please, don't send me there!" It was the ultimate karma for a man who had only ever cared about his pristine image and his pride. Dwayne began to laugh, a dark, rich, booming sound. He looked at Katrina as if she'd personally hung the moon and the stars. "Take him in," he ordered his men, his eyes never leaving her. "Make sure they know exactly who he is." The enforcers grabbed the screaming, thrashing Liam and dragged him down the service corridor, his desperate cries fading into the distance, leaving the hallway peacefully quiet. 6 months later, the warm summer sun beat down on the sprawling terrace of the estate. The air smelled of blooming jasmine and the faint, salty breeze off the water. Katrina lounged under a pergola, lazily working on a silver laptop. The syndicate had never been more powerful. With Arthur bankrupted and Liam serving a long sentence in daily terror, Katrina had completely rebuilt the family's financial infrastructure, dissolving the vulnerable old accounts and funneling everything into legitimate developments. She wasn't just his CFO anymore, she was the architect of it all. The glass doors slid open and Dwayne walked out, just back from a meeting, his sleeves rolled up over his tattooed forearms. He stopped, leaning against the doorframe, his amber eyes completely fixated on her. "You're staring, Mr. Russo," Katrina said without looking up, a confident smirk tugging at her lips. "I will never stop staring at you, Mrs. Russo," he replied, his voice a low purr. He walked over, gently shutting her laptop and setting it aside, then settled in beside her. "The other families officially surrendered the northern ports to us today," he murmured. "They didn't even try to negotiate. They know if they anger me, you'll bankrupt their entire bloodlines by lunchtime." Katrina laughed, running her fingers through his thick hair. "I only use my powers for evil when people disrespect my husband." Dwayne pulled back, framing her face with his hands, his expression turning serious, stripping away the ruthless boss to reveal the man who worshipped the ground she walked on. "You saved my life, Katrina," he whispered fiercely. "Not just my empire. You brought light into a world I thought was only darkness. I'll spend every second of the rest of my life proving to you how magnificent you are." Tears of joy pricked her eyes. She thought of the baggy gray sweaters she used to hide in, the years she'd spent hating her own body, believing she was unworthy of love, unworthy to simply take up space. And now she looked at the most dangerous man in the city, a man who bowed only to her, and she finally truly believed the truth. She was a masterpiece. "I know," she whispered back, her heart full, pulling his lips down to hers. "I know." And as the golden sun set over the skyline, casting long, beautiful shadows across the terrace, the invisible ghost of the accounting department faded into history for good, leaving behind only the undisputed, fiercely loved queen of the syndicate. So here's what stays with me about Katrina's story. For years, the world told her that her body was something to hide, something to apologize for, something to bury under layer after layer of cheap fabric. And the cruelest part is that she believed it. She let people like Liam define her worth, let them convince her that brilliance and beauty couldn't possibly live in the same person if that person happened to be soft or heavy. or anything other than what magazines told her to be. But the thing she'd been taught to hide was never the problem. The problem was that the people around her were too small to see what was right in front of them. And maybe that's the real lesson tucked underneath all the drama and the boardroom showdowns. True power doesn't come from shrinking yourself to fit someone else's idea of acceptable. It comes from owning exactly who you are, every inch of it, and refusing to apologize for the space you take up in the world. Katrina didn't change her body to win. She changed her belief about it. And the moment she stopped hiding, she became unstoppable. Karma never misses, and Liam learned the hard way that you should never, ever underestimate a brilliant woman. If Katrina's transformation and that satisfying taste of justice hit the spot for you, then do me a favor and smash that like button right now. It honestly helps more than you know. Share this story with someone who needs the reminder that their worth was never up for debate. And if you want more stories exactly like this one, full of twists, romance, and characters who finally claim the power that was theirs all along, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming next. And drop a comment down below and tell me your favorite moment from the whole thing. Was it the boardroom takedown? The boutique? The night she bankrupted an entire empire with a few keystrokes? I read every single comment, and your favorite scene just might inspire the next story I tell. So don't be shy. Let's hear it.